Honorable Shri Shivraj Patil, Speaker Lok Sabha, Right Honorable Ms. Betty Boothroyd, Speaker House of Commons, Shri Sharad Dighe, Bansalji, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests and friends. On behalf of the Govind Ballabh Pant Memorial Society and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to all of you. Just a month ago, in this historic Central Hall of Parliament, the Society had organized another function at which the leader of the opposition had received the Best Parliamentarians Award from the Prime Minister. The award has been instituted in the name of Pandit Pant, who, except for the years he spent in British jails before independence, played a leading role in the state and central legislatures for 4 decades from the early 1920s. Today we are assembled here for the 17th Pandit Pant Memorial Lecture. It seems particularly apposite that this year's lecture should be delivered by one who presides over the Mother of Parliaments. Madam Speaker, I extend a very warm welcome to you and thank you for graciously agreeing to deliver this lecture. I would also like to place on record the gratitude of the Society for the active support extended to its programs by Shri Shivraj Patil. The subject for today's lecture is Britain and India, democratic giants. There are perhaps no two countries in the world which are so dissimilar and yet have so much in common as Great Britain and India. India is an ancient land with a continuity of civilization stretching back over thousands of years. It is a vast country with a large population. Its culture has been enriched by many religions and languages. On all these counts, the dissimilarities between India and Great Britain need no elaboration. But there are powerful bonds which join the two countries. Above all, the values and institutions which the people of India and Great Britain share. When our founding fathers sat down to frame our constitution in this very hall, they discarded neither the institution of parliamentary democracy nor the English language. Indeed, there is much in our constitution that will have a familiar ring for you, Madam Speaker. In a way, it is a reminder of our shared history of a few hundred years. When Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth visited India in January 1961, our first President, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, summed up this historical interlude as follows. I quote, "The Indian people, as much as the British, elected to keep alive only the pleasant memories of their long association." Unquote. He went on to refer to, I quote, "the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, who guided us to this new destiny of peaceful relations, relations of friendship rather than strife, because there was no strife in his heart, there was no ill will and no rancor." Unquote. Further, he said, I quote, "The British impact on India has been in many ways an abiding one. The English language and literature play a prominent part in our lives, and the English tradition colors and conditions some of our ways of thought. Above all, we have sought to develop the British methods of politics and government, adapting them to our own context, unquote. During the same visit, Her Majesty the Queen expressed similar sentiments. She said, I quote, friendship between India and Britain is of a special kind. Shared experiences, similar institutions, these are the things which make communication possible across the frontiers of differing ways of life. These are the things to be treasured and nourished, unquote. This mutuality of goodwill and the desire to build a new positive relationship between India and Great Britain found concrete expression in the decision of India's first Prime Minister and the architect of independent India's foreign policy, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, to join the Commonwealth. But for that decision, it is difficult to say whether the Commonwealth would have developed into the large multiracial organization we see today. Over the years, it has strengthened relations among member countries and provided a useful forum for free and friendly discussions, both formal and informal. Bilateral relations between Britain and India, despite occasional hiccups, have been friendly and cooperative. Many Indians have made England their home. Some of them have made their mark in their chosen areas of activity, be it education or medicine, science, business or politics. Many British companies have been operating in India for decades and have been an important part of the commercial landscape. But the landscape itself is undergoing a change as a result of the shift in Indian policy towards economic liberalization and globalization. As the flow of foreign investment increases, let us hope that British investment will keep pace. Britain can take legitimate pride in having the oldest parliament in the world, friendly claims of neighboring Isle of Man notwithstanding. India's parliament, on the other hand, is very young, only 44 years old. But with nearly 550 million eligible voters on the rolls, we are the largest functioning democracy that ever existed on earth. This is not to say that we have no problems. We have them in plenty. There is no dearth of contentious issues, social, economic, cultural and political, constantly jostling for attention in an open society as an ancient land seeks to transform itself into a modern, self-reliant nation, committed to the goal of providing equal opportunities to all its citizens. However, our democratic ethos has not wilted under the onslaught of complex, difficult problems. Indeed, Parliament has demonstrated the capacity to grapple successfully even with potentially inflammable and divisive issues. That our democratic institutions have stood up to these pressures is basically because of the strong foundations on which they have been placed by our founding fathers. The strength of this commitment to free institutions can be gauged from the following two excerpts from Pandit Pant's speeches. In 1950, he said in his convocation address at the Aligarh University, I quote, "Democracy and totalitarianism, whatever their shape or name, cannot go together. A system which stifles individual freedom and reduces all men to automatons cuts at the root of real human progress. Everything should be done for creating conditions of expanding welfare, but the spirit of man should not be crippled. Democracy believes in conversion. It wins over people through argument. Its appeal is to reason. It is impossible to separate means from ends, and it is a delusion to think that any right purpose can be achieved through wrong means," unquote. In his convocation address at the Allahabad University in 1946, he said, I quote, "To minimize the natural and essential majesty of a single individual is an outrage on democracy. Democracy demands justice and fair play for every single constituent. It has to be recognized that an individual citizen is always in a minority. In fact, in the smallest minority of one. Progressive cooperation. I have every confidence, Madam, that your visit will result in progressive cooperation, not only among the parliaments, but also between the peoples of the two countries. I have no wish to stand any longer between you and the distinguished Madam Speaker, as I am looking forward to a lecture as much as you are. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, sir, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, here in this historic hall, which witnessed the transfer of power 47 years ago, in the presence of so many members of the legislature and judiciary, surrounded by heads of missions, representatives of the city of Delhi and the universities of your country, I am indeed honored to be asked to give this address in memory of the great Indian patriot, Pandit Govind Ballabh Pant. He is remembered, of course, as a nationalist who was prepared to suffer physically for his beliefs and who used all his natural talents and acquired skills together with great nerve and courage to help secure an independent India. The 20th century hasn't produced too many heroes with reputations which have survived unchallenged, but he was one of them. He was even more. He was, without doubt, one of the most accomplished parliamentarians of his time. To his feats as a debater must be added his instinctive commitment to the parliamentary way of life. Few Democrats throughout the world have done more to uphold the authority of Parliament and the government's accountability to it. He was, and here of course I speak personally, the sort of politician every speaker would like to have in Parliament. This address, therefore, dedicated as it is to Pandit Pant, is merely the latest tribute to one of the most distinguished builders of democratic India. His India, of course, is modern. In contrast, I come to you as the Speaker of a very ancient Parliament, as the representative of a democracy which deserves the name giant through its longevity and I believe also through its achievements. My office, in fact, as you heard earlier, is more than 600 years old. Our speakership goes back under its present title to Sir Thomas Hungerford in the year 1377. I am the 155th speaker, but in all those years, I am the first woman to hold that post. In India, you haven't had a woman speaker as yet. However, you've had a woman prime minister long before us. Indira Gandhi became your prime minister in 1966. We had to wait until Margaret Thatcher in 1979 before we had a woman as head of government. You know, I'm often asked if being a woman speaker makes any difference to the role. I can assure you it doesn't make one iota of difference. I think that for a short while, you know, after I became Speaker in April 1992, some members of my Parliament may have found the situation to be, well, you know, a little awkward, but a situation to which, you know, they were quite unaccustomed. But it didn't last for long. Politics in Britain is a pretty robust business. But at the end of the day, our members are used to acknowledging the authority of the chair, whoever occupies it. They didn't elect me, I know, because I am a woman, and I didn't put myself forward on that basis. I said to them, elect me for what I am.